I really am beginning to dislike the term AI tutors.
My problem is that we say human in the loop, but it's the human slowing down that feedback loop. Because one of the advantages I see that AI tutors could have is that closing this feedback loop to pupils. We have a problem with our education system where you just go through the school years, and what are the gaps? The gaps just get wider and wider and wider. And if there is a hope, or if there's a way that each pupil can have access to a pedagogically rich AI tutor that supports them in that consolidation, well, surely that's something we should explore.
I think that what makes it so difficult is that we just don't know the proportion of errors that teachers make.
Welcome to Thinking Deeply about AI for Schools. I'm James Radburn, and joining me as always is Neil Almond. We've got a fascinating topic to dive into today.
Absolutely. And for those just joining us, this is the podcast where we explore the rapidly evolving intersection of artificial intelligence and education. Every month, we're going to pose the big questions, examine what's changing in the AI and education landscape, and just try to make sense of it all and what that means for education, for pupils, and the future of learning.
And we're not here to give you all of the answers, because honestly, we're trying to figure this out together. Instead, we want to create a space where we can think critically, question assumptions, and explore those possibilities. Each episode, we explore one topic, one research article, or one AI update, and ask the ultimate question: what does this mean for education? So this week, we're going to go into this world that's moving very quickly from product demos to policy conversations, and that is about AI tutors. And the key thing here is, are AI tutors generating breakthroughs in learning, or are we moving faster than this evidence? So in this episode, which I can envisage already that will become several episodes, we'll explore what AI tutors are, why there is so much excitement about them, and whether actually this is a hype or whether there is research out there and examples that this is concrete. But we'll also consider some of those deeper concerns around bias, safeguarding, cheating, the cognitive offloading, and what this happens to one-to-one support.
And because this is not just a story about shiny new tools, it is really a story about what we think tutoring is, what good learning looks like, and whether AI can genuinely support people to think more deeply rather than just helping them get to that answer faster.
Now, one of the things that I've been listening to lots of podcasts in my journeys up and down the M5 and M6, I think I did the whole of the M5 the other day, is this concept of what an AI tutor is. I wouldn't throw in this term around. And I think it's important to distinguish what it could be, because with all the research we're discussing, and we'll share bits and pieces that have come out recently around Harvard and others, one of the things you may see is like it's almost a GPT on ChatGPT, where you're using an open source product and you're asking it questions. So that's one idea. You've got the open large language models, such as Gemini or ChatGPT, using pupils for homework, for help. Not much education design behind them. The other end, you kind of got these old intelligent tutoring systems that are very subject-specific, structured, and designed to adapt to questions the student use. But also you've almost got this middle ground as well, where they're purpose-built. So things like Google, who are looking at this Learn LM, or what Khan Academy have done as well. And even some of these models are being used with a human in the loop. Coin the phrase of that almost. So when we say AI tutor, you've got to have quite an open mind of what that looks like in practicality, or especially when you're deploying them or using them as well, because they are a massive range. It's quite a vast concept behind it. So it could be quite a carefully designed Socratic learning tool that's particular for maths, so it's got the whole knowledge graph behind it. Or sometimes it could be people thinking, oh, it's just a channel jackpot that people are using online, or it could be something that's actually just very structured, very controlled inputs where a pupil actually doesn't chat to it. They answer, they ask, it asks the students questions, they answer them, and it will then adapt in the background. The AI is almost in the background adapting to it as well. So we're not in this episode, we're kind of not going into those, but just be aware that that's what AI tutoring is. And we'll probably say that at some point, and I know Neil's done a podcast, done an article on this before around what makes a good AI tutor. And I think that distinguish between what an AI tutor is and that technical kind of element of it is important.
I really am beginning to dislike the term AI tutors for the reasons that you have said, and you will see um, a research paper or one of the tech AI bros on Twitter or LinkedIn, whatever it is, and it will say, AI tutor fundamentally changes everything, and then you have to dig a little bit deeper, as you say, just to kind of work out, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about an AI tutor here, which is difficult because I think there are some that are going to be pretty useful, and I think there are some that are, or some uses of the term of AI tutor when it is more just the right kids, like we trust you to use ChatGPT as a tutor, going to be less helpful. So I am all for really kind of distinguishing these different types of tutors that use technology to support them, whether that be sort of complete generative AI chatbot free, you rely on the pupil to do the right thing, versus ones that have far more sort of guardrails that won't let you deviate the conversation much, through to ones, as you say, where perhaps the learner does have a little bit more control about it. So something like Google Learn LM, where you write, you say the kind of things that you're interested in, and it will kind of create the problems based on those things. Whole other conversation to have whether that is the right thing to do for kids or whatnot. But I think we really sort of need more specific terms to help us sort of really clarify what we mean when we're saying AI tutors. Because I say, we're going to talk about one bit of research now, but for every bit of research that I see around AI tutors and them being effective, I can point to you with another research article that says these AI tutors are not effective and that you should never give them to children. And then you sort of have to go into say, you have to look at the difference between what we mean when we say AI tutors to really sort of get that, dare I say, nuance of what's happening in these studies.
Yeah, and one of those studies you were talking about there was the Google Learn LM study with ED as well. And it was an
Yeah.
RCT. So, the quality of this is important as well. And I think when you're looking at this research, we're professionals in education, but we don't not necessarily research specialists as well. And so the quality that we look at these research and how they measure are important. Are really, really key elements behind this. And I know Charter College and the EEF do put guidance out there around actually what quality research looks like. But the Google one's interesting because it looked at chat-based maths tutoring. Now, maths tutoring, I think, is a really interesting one to pick on, mainly because the subject matter is hierarchical. You need to know X before you can go to Y and move it down. So if you don't have understanding of basic place value and number, and then multiplication and division, actually some of the fraction work that you will get to down the line and algebra, well, actually there will be gaps in the knowledge if you don't have that. So it's a really interesting way of looking at it. But essentially the research, and I'll cipher some of it off and put some of the key points out there, but feel free to go out and have a look yourself. But it's this kind of idea where pupils receive short sessions with the Learn LM, and it said they were 5.5 percentage points more likely to solve novel problems than pupils who worked with human tutors alone. Now, with this model, what was really important, and with this research, is that every message that was sent out by the AI was then checked by a human. So therefore, there were reported very low factual errors, 0.1% of messages. So it was in terms of quite reliable in that, or very reliable, you can say. And we'll probably come on to that debate later. We've already talked about it before we've started recording. But it makes it one of the more practical and policy related studies. Now, those in the UK, this would be really interesting because it was 165 students across 5 secondary schools between years 9 and 10. And they want to replicate this and want to do this again this year, I think in the US as well. And it meant there was a really, they approved, these tutors, these human tutors, approved 76.4% of the messages with basically no edits. That's a huge point of view behind it. But I think my problem with almost this is that we say human in the loop, but it's the human slowing down that feedback loop. Because one of the advantages I see that AI tutors could have is that closing this feedback loop to pupils. And if you are adding that human in, actually, are you more efficient? And it's a quandary I kind of question all the time. I don't know.
Thinking that maybe right now it probably is a sort of a trade-off potentially worth having. That's the sort of gut feeling that I have based on this sort of technology or this generative artificial intelligence, and tutoring is certainly new, and I think it's the right thing that a human safeguard right now is at that point where they can intervene if need be. Obviously, there's no point closing that feedback loop quicker if the feedback is wrong. That's you could then potentially sort of multiply the errors rather than fix any errors without human oversight. I also think it's, again, we obviously weren't involved in the study at all. We might have to get Craig on to talk about it. Maybe he'll want to do that after we've been on his podcast a few times. Maybe he'll come. It's an open invitation, Craig. If you're listening, you're free to come on. But I would imagine, again, I can't imagine that the feedback that the large language model, whatever they might be using, is going to provide so much written feedback that a human, and to be part of to work with EDA, you need to be able to teach mathematics up to secondary GCSE level comfortably. So we are talking about not just humans but experts in their subject domain as well. I can't imagine they would take too long to cipher through those messages and flag them, whether they're right or wrong, or having to correct them in any way, shape, or form. So I think right now it's the right thing to do. Will we need it all the time? Probably not. But I think it might be one of those things, going back to what you said. And when you look at the history of tutor, I'm going to call it tutors through technology, because it's always maths, right? You go back to the old intelligent tutoring systems from the 80s. Think about Alex is one famous one that's been out there for quite some time. I think McGraw Gill or something own it now. But it's always maths. Why? Because it's hierarchical. It's very simple. If they get A, they can go to B. I think we then sort of look at more different subjects like humanities, English literature, where we've got that more sort of, it's wider rather than deeper. In terms of that knowledge structure, I would think you would need far more humans overlooking what that chatbot was providing, just because there's so much more margin for error, I would have thought, based on the training data and the way it could potentially could go.
It comes back to this point that it needs to know the curriculum you're teaching, and it needs to know where it goes. So Math Academy is a popular one in the US at the moment, and they've recently released a book that I found a PDF on LinkedIn about, which is all about the cognitive science. They've gone through it all, and they've got their hierarchical document. But it's all about this adaptive diagnosis, where that child is, or that hierarchical knowledge is against the Common Core in the US. That's fine, which is great. So it knows where it is. But I think there's another question, going completely off tangent with any of these AI tutors, is the fact that, let's say I was in year four as a student. This may work more in secondary context, actually. So let's say I'm a year eight. student, and I've been given a tutor like this, as well as, again, high quality teaching in class. But this tutor does this diagnostic, and most of these platforms do, of some kind of diagnostic. And any intervention, same thing. We do that within schools. We do very much a human aid approach of it. That's great. That's what we need to know where that student is. Is there a danger then that if it finds that I've got content knowledge from the year 4, year 5, year 6 curriculum, well, is it going to take me all the way back there, fill in all those gaps and build it up? Or is it going to work alongside and support what I'm being taught in class and then almost consolidate that as well as fill the gaps? It's like there's a balance here as well. There's not only just with what knowledge do I need to fill the gap so I can work with it, and maths is an easy one with this because it's hierarchical, but there's also how is it approached from a child's perspective? Because one of the advantages of technology and AI, and where we're seeing a lot with pupils talking to these AI toys or things online, is the fact that they don't want to talk to their teachers. They actually get this feedback back from something that's inanimate, but they feel like it's a human. It's a lot softer. It's a lot kinder. It's kind of, they're happy to listen to that before they go back into class and try it. So I think there's a moral side of this, of how does it feel like from a pupil and student perspective. And I wonder, and I haven't seen it yet, too much evidence from what are pupils' viewpoints on this as well.
No, that'd be a really interesting bit of data to gather around how they feel about it and what they think is best. And because again, from the couple of experiences that I know, it's really mixed. And adults are as there are some who are vastly pro, some who are vastly against it, and vast majority of us in the middle. And like, from what I hear, it's the same with pupils and that use around AI as well. So it'd be really interesting to see whether are we, don't get me wrong, the concept of schooling, we're forcing children to be in somewhere that they don't want to be anyway for the vast majority of the time, but we know it's good for them. But does that change when their experience of that would be, right, you all have your own sort of personal workstations and get the headphones on, and your maths lesson is just, wherever it is that you may be in whatever intelligent tutoring system, AI tutoring tool that rears its head and that schools are able to afford or deploy in their infrastructure. It's a weird one, and I think we lots have been said about sort of belonging and all of that stuff, and if I think I maybe struggle with school a little bit more than I did if my experience of it was come in and log in and just do it is what you need to do, and with a teaching assistant wandering around and just being that extra bit of support for me if I needed it. I don't know, but no, getting children's thoughts about all of this would be really interesting. And I think that you mentioned that another interesting point there as well around sort of how best would we use these in terms of, is it just a consolidation tool, or do you give teachers the pupils the choice to go, hey, if you're smashing it and you're in year 4 and you want to move on to the year 5 stuff, crack on, because then you're potentially widening a gap within your own sort of microcosm of your own classroom, which if anyone's taught any maths at primary school, towards the upper levels and the lowers, you've still got people who struggle to number bond to 5 and those who are ready to do some more interesting complex stuff. And if you're just exasperating that would make any sort of whole class teaching that you're doing harder. But again, this conversation is not it's not new. We've been having this sort of conversation of do you give your quote unquote rapid graspers, which is a term I absolutely loathe and detest. Do you give what are you doing for your rapid graspers? They clearly do it, know it. So what are you doing to move them on quickly? And then you get to year 6 and you wonder, it's how did the gap go from a couple of months in reception, all the way then through to several years by year six, because we've been widening those gaps as part of our teaching, because we had to, get those rapid graspers through more interesting stuff, because that's what teachers are. Some members of SLT wanted in some schools. So I think I'd be more comfortable with it as a consolidation tool. Like I quite like the idea of it just being like 2 weeks behind, like what you're doing in your like lessons, coupled with a bit more sort of like spaced retrieval from some fancy algorithm, or I could even tell the system what we've done and what I want them to do, and the system could use all its knowledge that it knows that pupils have questions right and wrong and whatnot, and it can do that to sort of give them their own sort of variation or their own sort of real specific space practice quiz based to them, and then go through that content that they all had. I think for me that's a better place to start with, rather than just, here's a system, go wild, kids.
Yeah, in some ways, this whole idea of space retrieval, I've always thought that technology is perfectly suited to it, putting up the right points for pupils at the right time. Like as teachers, we try and put this through, like a do now activity in the classroom before we go to the main bit of learning. We try and do it, but I don't think it's necessarily a very clever way of doing it. We're manually doing it, and every child in our class will need to practice things more times than their peers next to them, or less, to make sure it's consolidated and it has encoded into their long-term memory. So I think technology's got a really interesting way of being able to do that really, really well. And I think the AI tutors, if they consolidate the learning that's happening in the classroom, having that space retrieval aspects into it, so they really mastered it, it would ensure that it would honour that mastery element that we talk about so often. That would say you need to grasp it before we can move on and make sure those prerequisites are secure. But I feel like it goes into a bigger conversation that we won't get into because we'll be here all day, and it's not a job neither of us want probably, is we have a problem with our education system where you just go through the school years. And what are the gaps? The gaps just get wider and wider and wider. And if there is a hope, or if there's a way that each pupil can have access to a pedagogically rich AI tutor that supports them in that consolidation, well, surely that's something we should explore, because it seems like the benefits of it could be huge. We don't know. And then it goes on to the other thing I think you said earlier, and it was came from, I think it was a news article as well, where a dad up north created a AI chatbot. It was a couple of years ago, before the AI tutors were a thing really, and used ChatGPT and the GPT, custom GPT in there, but actually personalised tutoring to that child. So whatever their interests were, they kind of then applied the maths or their English, whatever they were doing, to that context. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I don't know if I'm comfortable with this idea of personalising learning to that context of that child. I see the benefits of it, but I don't. It makes me uncomfortable, and I'm not sure why. Do you see what I mean? Or
Yeah, it's I think it's longer term. I think it's just that message of, a, you can't do this unless you're interested in it, in which case that's blatantly not true, because eventually we want them to transfer this knowledge to things that they're certainly not interested in. Like, you hear all the time, don't you, about, the ever updated list of things that we should be teaching kids throughout their schooling, mortgages and personal finance and all that stuff. No 14-year-old is interested in tax returns and mortgages. But we certainly give them the maths to be able to sort of apply it to that. So the idea that we would then give them information, it could be about football, rugby, or whatever, and that's some issues right there as well, in terms of potentially reinforcing those gender stereotypes as well, which is not needed. And they'll then be able to, after only sort of working with rugby and football, or whatever it might be, that they can then magically transfer this to mortgages and tax returns, or whatever it is, basic percentages when they're out shopping or whatever. I don't think necessarily is going to be helpful for them. So I think there's like a transfer issue. I think there's sort of a long-term sort of motivation issue in the terms that, it signals, well, don't worry, you don't have to worry about things that aren't interesting to you right now. But, you introducing something interesting in mathematics, whatever it might be, might give them a new interest or spur some interest that wasn't there before. And so I think the idea, and it's also, 30 kids, right? Yes, we can probably do this a little bit quicker now because of ChatGPT and whatnot, but 30 different kids with 30 different interests. That's a lot of yeah, that's a lot of worksheets or a lot of questions that, and obviously if you're doing 1 to 30 teaching in class, I say, in an analog style, you're not going to be able to do it like that. And then you're just going to, you think as a teacher, you're thinking about the wrong things as well. You're not thinking about how am I going to teach this in a way that is going to means that the vast majority of the class doing it. You're thinking, oh, what was Sandy's favorite thing that I need to be putting this, what that I should wrap this question in. And so I think, big issues when it comes to that for me, I think as well. And I think those are my three reasons why I sort of don't like it. Long-term motivation, I think there's a transfer issue. And in terms of, I think it just increases teachers' workload with, importantly, sort of very little evidence that it actually improves anything.
I think there will be use in terms of applying context in certain situations. I don't think it's a complete let's not personalize anything. But I do wonder whether when these tools get more important, more capable down the line, let's say, and you've got your own curriculum, you've got your own pedagogical model, it's socrative in its way of working, there could be things like financial literacy. It could be one of those painful lessons on a Friday afternoon, the graveyard shift, where actually, let's put it into context of a project that they're creating a business or something. Actually, they want to learn those skills and they need to learn those skills to be able to apply it in the right way. And I think that could be an interesting aspect on it. Something you were saying around the role of the teacher and where these AI tutors come in place. And Harvard released a RCT as well. And they came out with some interesting things that compared a custom AI tutor to active in-class learning. And they found that through the AI tutor, they learned significantly more in less time. And then students felt more engaged, they felt more motivated, and it was like pedagogically following the best practices. But I think what I took away from that report more than anything else, because it was about 194 undergraduate physics in this one, so it was science, is the design of how you use these tutors are important. Because what it comes back to is, if you're consolidating learning at home and supporting it, it's that what do you do in the classroom? Does your shift in the classroom that, yes, we will really important guided in practice that we're going to do, guided instruction, and we're going to do some really purposeful practice. We'll do some low stakes quizzing behind it, do lots of check for understanding that you know that you are confident, you're clear with this in this application. But some of that extra consolidation work or something else can be done outside of class. And I think that whole shift of what happens in school and what happens outside of school, and raise the question of homework again, is a really interesting debate that I think education is going to have very soon, because there is every school across the country and across the world that they will give homework out at the moment that will be just consolidating bits and pieces on paper or using online platforms like Sparks or whatnot, and you can just click the right answer, get AI to do it for you anyway, because you copy and paste it and they don't learn anything. So for me, it raises this whole AI tutor thing almost raises the question on what is important that we should be keeping in the classroom and what are the important things, what are some of the things that we could offload to AI to ensure that our classroom time is the most powerful and rich, and those relationships are built, and we really have an idea of where those children are, and we can guide them to the next steps. I don't know the answer to it. I just think it's
Mhm.
going to be an interesting debate that AI is going to create for us.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I agree with that. Um, in the sense of whether AI would be able to sort of completely take over aspects of that, and that means that we can focus on different things in the classroom. Um, because I just don't think we know enough about whether AI will ever get there to that point. I mean, the Harvard is an interesting study. But as you mentioned, I think it was university physics uh, students. You know, I don't. It's interesting, of course it is. But when you go to, people are on that physics course because they want to learn about physics, and they are paying. It's in the States, so a fair, and it's Harvard, so a fair whack to be there, and so there is a motivation there that doesn't exist, I think, for the 14-year-old and 15-year-old who again is going to school because the law says that you need to and have to be there. I also think if you're studying physics at university, you have a whole host of prior knowledge of which you can use to help you with your physics. And you have obviously demonstrated through various sort of entrance examinations, tests, wherever it might be, in America, so, GPAs and all that sort of fun stuff, that you are capable of studying physics at a very prestigious university at this level. Which again goes back to what we were talking about in that's not the case where you can sort of guarantee that everyone is going to be far closer in terms of their understanding and knowledge rather than that. And I think, yeah, you could absolutely, I think, for humans, say humans, for adults to learn something when you have that motivation to do so, I could imagine that I would probably learn a little bit more faster and certainly report higher engagement motivation about it. I just don't know whether that's the same for teenagers and children.
Often when I talk about AI or think about AI and have conversations, I always go back to where shouldn't AI be? And where shouldn't we use technology? And where does the human bit come in place? And I'm just trying to take something that I don't think as adults, often we're in that tricky space of remembering how learning a new thing is difficult. So let's take something like physical, like golf, for example. Okay. I've got a golf set here and I am absolutely rubbish because all I'm doing is watching a YouTube video. I don't know how it feels like, what a good swing does. I did one intro, and yes, I can get a camera who does AI tutor. It literally is like an AI tutor. It will see where I am, put the pinpoints on it, saying these are where I think it's going to work. This is what you need to work at. But I need that human. I need that someone to really guide me and point me in the right direction. And I think that's important as well. And it's with all of this, it's I've got a passion to want to learn on it, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm almost wasting my time trying to explore it. I need a professional guide or professional helper to help me get to that initial stage where I can then use almost a hybrid AI tutoring almost to consolidate what
Mhm.
the teacher's saying or the students like what I'm getting told. And I think that could be replicable in education in some ways. This idea of space retrieval, this idea of some pupils will need to consolidate and practice things a lot more than others. I think that's where we've got a real hope in this use. And when the DFE announced they're looking into AI tutors, they explicitly aim this at disadvantaged pupils. And it's from 2 points of view. One, to close a gap, but two, I think there's an equity thing here as well, because those who have devices can access free AI online quite easily, quite quickly, whether it's to do their homework or whether to actually use it purposefully. I think there's an interesting scope there as well?
I have succumbed and I give OpenAI £20 a month, my hard-earned money, because I was getting really annoyed with my rate limits being, you know, put to zero within sort of 5-10 minutes of a conversation. And with all my £20, it's I very rarely ever have that problem. It's the same with Claude. And so absolutely, currently, if you're fortunate enough to be able to have a spare 20 quid to give to Anthropic or OpenAI, um, and you're sitting your 14, 15-year-olds down and getting them to do things, they are getting more out of it and they probably have, again, not new conversations around advantage versus disadvantage. They probably have a set space for them to do it. They probably have a decent computer, whether that be a laptop, so at least a sort of 13-inch screen. And for the disadvantaged pupils, they probably have to try and manage on some sort of mobile device, whether that might be some sort of tablet or a mobile phone, which is just not necessarily the optimum way to go about it. So yeah, that exists, and I think it's really interesting to see how the UK government are going to approach this AI-powered one-to-one tutoring, and whether well, again, is the expectation going to be that they do it in school, whether that be after school, lunchtime, or are they hoping that these pupils will magically want to decide to now potentially do their homework if they didn't do so because it's AI powered. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they go about this and how they sort of measure success and all of that stuff. It's yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think with anything with this in this AI world, what it's trifecta of policy needs to be supportive of it. You need actually companies who can build this, but also you need the teachers with the practicalities of the implementation, but also the cognitive science to build it as well as a curriculum. So there's quite a few different things that need to work together in order to create an AI tutor, or however we use it, to be purposeful. One thing, I think we could go on for hours, but I think one thing I think we should leave on today, and then we could probably come back to this, come back and actually, see if we can get Craig on to talk about the ED report in a little bit more detail and see what their plans are for it. And we talked about it before, and you brought it up, but I think with all of these reports, there's something around accuracy of AI tutors that comes up time and time and time again. And you say that, okay, it may be 0.41% or whatever it is, that an AI tutor will get something wrong. And therefore that could equate to about 1 million questions a day or so, if it's for every student. But is our expectation of AI to be 100% correct, or any technology to be 100% correct 100% of the time, too ambitious? Because I know as teachers, there are lessons that we've all taught, we've walked away from them and it's like, why did I do that? Or I've done something completely different and I didn't plan to do that and it just went off on a tangent. And we've all done that, whether it's through an ECT or whether experienced teachers.
Yeah.
So are we holding AI to this pedestal where actually it will never reach to our expectations? And it's probably a better way to think about, okay, how can we integrate this into what we're doing already?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is the approach. It's how we can integrate into what we're already doing. I do think I think that what makes it so difficult is that we just don't know the proportion of errors that teachers make on a regular basis. And thinking off the top of my head, like the only way you could do that is if you hired probably thousands of observers to go into a representative number of schools across the age spectrum, making sure that you were primarily looking at across a whole, all the different types of lessons for a large enough portion of time, and they were just noting down errors as they sort of noticed them happen. And maybe then you would get some idea of the proportion of errors that happen daily on a every sort of day current situation. But then you got problems like how I'm being observed, so I'm going to make sure that my lessons are really up to scratch this week and stuff like that. So there could still be some issues with that, but it's the only way that I could think about that you could actually do it. Um, I would be surprised. And again, it's just a vibe because humans are fallible to all sorts of erroneous mistakes and errors. But I would be amazed if more, if a tutor, if a teacher didn't make more errors uh, than this sort of 0.14 hallucinations or whatever that was. If every student in England used them for 2 lessons, so if, this is from that ED tutor. So if every student used this ED tutor for 2 lessons, that would mean about sort of a million errors across that sample. And I hate it when you sort of measure things that way as well. When there's 700,000 days missed a week or something like that. Yeah, it's a rubbish way to report things. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, I think we do. I also thinking about ED as well, that is a sort of one-to-one situation. So if one child is making gets an error wrong in that message, that's just that one child that's been affected. If a teacher makes an error in a lesson, that's a 1 to 30 error. And so unless the teacher may realize that they've made a mistake, in which case they might try and self-correct. We've certainly all been there where we try to self-correct and the people still remember the wrong thing because that's the way they are, because we go, oh, that was a mistake. Da, 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 da. I think we also got to think about like the kinds of errors that we're talking about here. When I certainly did go into many lessons, like, I would still see work that wasn't necessarily, text on the board or whatever that wasn't necessarily like punctuated correctly. Now, obviously, the pupils aren't noticing that, but they are still reading text that isn't punctuated correctly. So is that an error that we're sort of happy with to say that, that's a potentially, something that it could impact pupils' learning because they're reading it and they're not taking in that orthographic system because they realise, oh, teacher didn't start that proper noun with a capital letter that time, and I haven't realised it's a proper noun, but I'm just going to read on anyway and go, oh, okay, fine. I you know, don't need to use their capital letter for that word because teacher didn't have to or teacher forgot to, even though it's not a sort of outwardly facing whilst I'm doing some teaching sort of mistake. So yeah, I think we do hold technology because we're so used to it. Sort of, I don't know, maybe we sort of put it on that sort of pedestal of it's all right, it's either right or wrong, and I think that's a big issue that we have. With it, we do just take it as gospel. I'm guilty of it as anything. You get a confident message back from ChatGPT or insert whichever one of these chatbots, and you do think it's right, because we're so used to thinking that technology is sort of somehow superior. And when you think about a calculator will always give you the right answer unless it's a user error through the input. And I think the kind of technology that we've had has been that sort of system, that this new technology that does suffer from this sort of feature of hallucinations is kind of quite jarring to our mental models of how we suspect this technology to behave. And so we aren't necessarily good at sort of updating our model around that this could be right, could be wrong. But that said, it's always important to remember that, yes, we talk about keep the human in the loop, keep the expert in the loop, absolutely. But humans are fallible, they make errors, and I would imagine up and down the country on any day, assuming 100% attendance across every school in the country, I would suggest that within 2 lessons, there are probably more than a million errors, either that being like direct or indirect, being made. And I'd be surprised and shocked if it wasn't. And I call on any researcher who is listening to this, try to find a way to work it out, because I think it would be really interesting.
But
And I think it would change the conversation around how we think about these. Because if we can get the tutor that's better than the tutor, even if, let's say, for example, it's 0.2. Well, now, this combination through ED is better. And I think that would change the conversation a lot.
Yeah, and even in you wouldn't even need to see what teachers have written. It's just their language.
Exactly.
Across the country, it will be different in terms of how different nouns, phrases, colloquialisms that are being used as well. Actually, that's not as easy as black and white, right or wrong, um, as well. So I think that is really interesting. So I think while you were talking, I was thinking we've said to ourselves we're healthy skeptics around AI. Often, I think that's the phrase we've used. But I was like, okay, what are the promise? What are the hopeful things then? Because we can come down on this, say, oh yeah, we don't think it's going to work. But I think there are some hopes in this, and I think this AI isn't the next big thing that's going to be like interactive whiteboards. I think this could change education or be embedded in. And I think we've got it on a pedestal at the moment. It's going to change everything. But I think actually we should think about how it's embedded in. But the three things I thought of that I'm hopeful for in some ways is how we can close the feedback loop, whether that's actually just for students getting feedback so they can draft something again or get immediate feedback on an answer and we don't build those misconceptions. There are even tools out there that are coaching teachers just on that kind of idea as well. So closing that feedback loop. I think the other thing with this is scalability. There's a massive jump to start off with in trying to integrate these, whether you may need more humans in the loop, but over time these will be scalable. And I think that's interesting. And the third thing for me is actually how you can get really accurate diagnosis of where every child is and where the gaps are and where the commonalities are for those pupils. I think that could be really interesting insights that will help a teacher, because I think teaching is difficult because the learning isn't always visible. And the more data points that we get of a high quality to identify what are those misconceptions that come in or where those gaps in knowledge that we can address, something really concrete, that could be amazing. And then we address that through space retrieval as well. That could really help us as teachers, just having that raw data, being able to action it as well, both in class and our teaching, but also through whether it's extra time on the AI tutor or other things as well. I think that's be important. Are there any hopes from you where you think AI tutors could be really purposeful?
Just building on that last one around accurate diagnosis, just thinking around how that handover meeting that you get, sort of certainly in in primary or for the secondary teacher, if it's a new to teaching year 8 or year 9, like how useful that would be to have a sort of knowledge graph of each child's personal uh, learning journey, and hopefully, and undoubtedly you would then be able to talk to the system and it would tell you class 6Es, 7Es, 8Es, whatever it is, main sort of knowledge gaps and stuff like that. So you don't have to do too much of the sifting through the data yourself. And I think that's a really sort of interesting bit around that. Um, I think in terms for me, I think what I'm sort of hopeful about is that certainly I think the ED study is really powerful because it just kind of it keeps the human there, and I think that's something to be really interested in. I think for for teachers who potentially might be fearful that the role of the teacher might change, I think this is kind of evidence that points towards that. You know, teacher expertise within your subject is still important right now, and this study only got the results that it did because it had those experts there that kept them going, which I think is really really useful signal to the profession that keep on getting better at teaching and keep on improving your subject knowledge, because that's going to only help pupils learn more and potentially faster too. Um, the other thing that I think is potentially quite uh, interesting for me, I think there is a bit of an, again, we need to see how it all plays out and stuff. But again, linked to that sort of scalability of just the cost of it all. And if you can get the conditions of it right, if you are ensuring that you are providing space for pupils who potentially can't do this at home or won't do it at home, um, and you're providing space in the school day, whether that's sort of after school, a bit of a lunch club, whatever it might be. I know, there's pros and cons to all of that. But I think we are sort of seeing that, with every iteration of AI modeling, it gets cheaper to use, and it is cheaper than human capital. Tutors 45 quid an hour, this, 20 quid a month. There's an economic argument as well. I think that this potentially, again, all other conditions being right, which is a big if, for sure. But I do think, looking forward, there's an economic argument that it's a potentially a useful spend of people premium, for example. So I think in terms of your scale, so it's kind of more just adding, I guess, to yours than having my own.
No, that's good. I'll put you on the spot anyway. As you were talking, I was thinking about it anyway. But thank you for everyone listening to Thinking Deeply about AI for Schools. I'm James Radburn, and joining me, as always, is Neil Almond. If you enjoyed the conversation, subscribe to Neil's newsletter at forschools.ai. That's forschools.ai for your weekly dose of AI news around education, around the wider world, and ever so often a really good prompt for you to take and steal. Thank you. And next time we will be, I'm not sure what we're going to do next time, Neil, but there are hundreds of episodes that we could do. And I think we'll explore some more AI tutors and explore whether we can get some guests involved as well. Thank you, as always. Goodbye.
Always a pleasure.